on these trade talks. I'm joined by Steve Glickman. He's a professor at Georgetown University and formerly served for the Director of International Economic Affairs at the White House. Welcome to the show. A lot of folks are watching this closely for a number of reasons. The government officials are watching it to see if they can actually get a deal done. Business officials are watching it because they want to see this ultimately help their businesses. And arguably, consumers are watching this because they might get a better deal. Let's start with the reason why we have this deal and who's going to benefit. Let's start with the countries that are likely to benefit from this deal first. I assume the U.S. because they're leading the efforts.
Yes, well, you know, if you ask the Peterson Institute, which is a respected independent think tank here in D.C., they'll say all the countries participating will benefit. In fact, they say it's at quite a huge margin that the TPP is likely to lead to $225 billion in additional income for the countries participating. The U.S. share for that's about $75 to $80 billion in additional income per year. And they also talk about numbers in terms of $300 billion in exports for the countries participating. Of that share, the U.S. will have about $125 billion. So you're talking about large numbers of impact from the deal.
I guess I want to take a step back in terms of timeline and ask, why did this idea get presented in the first place? What instigated this? Because obviously it's sort of a consortium of countries at the Pacific, and it's no secret that China is a huge player that's noticeably not in the negotiations.
Well, so I think there were a couple of things that instigated it. One was the failure of the WTO negotiations in Doha. So an understanding that a big worldwide deal wasn't going to happen. I think two was a decision by the Obama administration to make a strategic shift to focusing on Asia. It's a source of a lot of the growing markets, the rising consumer class, and I think a real need after the recession to enforce and encourage the development of rule of law in the global trading system. And the countries involved in the TPP really grew. It started with 4 countries. The U.S. got involved and went to 8, and now 12. And you're talking now about a significant chunk of the U.S. trading partners.
Some are critical, saying that these negotiations have kind of happened in back rooms and in the dark. And I want to get your thoughts on whether or not you think it's been transparent enough.
So I think it has. I would make a few points. One, the way the system works and the way the Constitution has given powers to the President has the authority to negotiate all foreign agreements, including trade agreements, and you want those negotiations to happen in a confidential, secure environment because of the sensitive issues that come up. But in addition to that, the administration has been very actively engaged with Congress, with the representatives of the American people, getting them regular information. All members of Congress can review the TPP text as often as they want. The congressional committees responsible for trade and tax are intimately involved in this. And on top of that, you have these special advisory groups of outside business entities, of labor groups, of environmental groups, and of workers, farmers, ranchers that are intimately involved in the process, are kept apprised of what's happening in the negotiations.
So you mean, bottom line, just saying enough has been done to ensure there's transparency?
I believe a lot has been done. It's a big focus of the president.
Julian Assange. I'm going to read you what he says. He says the TPP's intellectual property regime would trample over individual rights and expression. And this is somebody, this is an individual that not everybody's a fan of, but when he says something, it at least makes you think a little bit about it. And I bring it up because intellectual property rights seems to be a very big issue in this particular discussion.
Critical to the agreement. I think the premise is almost laughable, though. Intellectual property rights are a core of the U.S. economy. 30 million U.S. workers are related to intellectual property intensive industries. And if the rules in the TPP are really based on U.S. rules around intellectual property, and no one can say that the U.S. is not one of the most innovative, creative economies that supports entrepreneurship and all sorts of industries, not the least of which is the internet. Silicon Valley and the U.S. information technology industry is leading the world, and it's on the basis of those intellectual property protection that's given to our inventors and our entrepreneurs. So I think he's dead wrong, and I think this agreement will go a long way towards encouraging that standard for all countries.
Why this and why not? Why not go back to the WTO? I mean, I know you talked about the failed round in Doha, but it's the same exact issues. They didn't get that deal done. Instead, the groups decided, okay, since we can't get a global deal, we'll do our own deal here on the Pacific. Why not go back and try to redo that deal again?
Well, I think the reality is there are very big countries like Brazil, Russia, India, and China that make doing that sort of deal they're not conducive to that sort of deal.
The BRICS, actually,
the
minus
BRICS,
one more.
And I know that's a theme for you guys this week. China and other countries are negotiating their own regional trade agreements. This is not the TPP and the U.S. involvement with it is not unique. This is the new model for negotiating trade agreements all over the world. And we think the TPP is going to be a standard bearer for how those agreements come out.
I think most of us would agree that businesses will benefit if we're talking about intellectual property rights and lowering sort of tariffs and trade deals. Explain to us how consumers might benefit, whether you're in the U.S. or you're in Japan or you're in China.
Well, I think a couple of ways. One, consumers just get access to a bigger diversity of less expensive products. When markets are opened and they're able to access products from additional countries throughout the world, that's a big benefit to consumers. But just to get back to this point around income, the addition in income that will come to the U.S., that money is going to U.S. workers. It's going to the average Americans that will benefit something along the realm of $150 to $200 per person. So that's real money in people's pockets that wouldn't be there but for this negotiation.
Steve Glickman, I apologize, we're out of time, adjunct assistant professor at Georgetown University, just down the road from here. Thank you very much for explaining.